This girl lost her mother, who froze to death because they were very poor. She asks a millionaire for help, and what he does next will amaze you. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel. To support my work, your help is greatly appreciated. The frigid winds of July whipped through the streets of Chicago that atypical winter morning. The thermometer read 41 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature rarely seen in the region, causing the few pedestrians venturing onto the downtown sidewalks to huddle deeper into their heavy coats. Theodore Alcott, 52, adjusted his imported cashmere scarf as he hurried towards the skyscraper where he was to attend another crucial meeting. As the owner of the largest hotel chain in the area, every minute of his time was precious and calculated. His firm steps echoed on the nearly deserted sidewalk when something caused him to stumble. Annoyed at what he assumed was some carelessly left obstacle, Theodore lowered his gaze, ready to voice his indignation. The words died in his throat. Curled up against the wall, a small girl was trembling uncontrollably. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was wearing only a thin t-shirt and worn-out sweatpants, wholly inadequate for that intense cold. Her lips were blue, and her eyes, though frightened, held a depth that made him stop. "Mister," her voice was weak, almost a whisper, "my mom froze to death this week. I have nowhere to go." Something inside Theodore's chest, something he had kept locked away for years, stirred. He recognized that look. It was the same one he saw every morning in the mirror, the look of someone who had lost everything. Without a second thought, he extended his hand to the girl. "What's your name?" "Lily," she replied hesitantly. "Come with me, Lily. We'll take care of this." A few yards away, the luxurious boutique, Elegance, glittered with its windows full of imported coats. The saleswoman's eyes widened when Theodore Alcott, known for his cold business dealings, entered, leading by the hand a child who looked more like a beggar. "I want everything this girl needs," he declared in his usual authoritative voice, "and a private space where we can talk." While the saleswoman rushed to assist them, Theodore observed Lily. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite identify. The girl looked in wonder at the colorful coats, but kept her hands close to her body, as if afraid to touch anything. "You can choose whatever you want," he said, softening his voice. Lily hesitated, then pointed timidly to a pink coat with faux fur trim. The saleswoman quickly brought the item in the appropriate size, along with several other pieces. In the VIP fitting room, transformed into a makeshift living room, Lily was now wearing warm and appropriate clothes. Her cheeks were beginning to regain color, but her eyes remained distant. "Tell me about your mother," Theodore asked gently. "Her name was Deborah," Lily began, playing with the sleeve of her new coat. "She worked really hard, but she always had time to tell me stories before bed. Then this cold came." Her voice faltered, and Theodore felt something tighten in his chest. Deborah. Why did that name sound so familiar? "Where did you live?" "In a small room near the Greyhound station. But after the landlady wouldn't let me stay." Theodore pulled out his cell phone, ready to activate his contacts. He needed to find out more about this Deborah, find some family for the girl. But before he could make the call, the door to the room was flung open. "Theodore, what does this mean?" Bernice Alcott, 49, stood in the doorway, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Theodore knew that expression well. It was the same one she had used 5 years ago when suddenly the memory hit him like a lightning bolt. Deborah, the secretary who had worked in his office for only 1 day before Bernice fired her on accusations he never fully understood. "Bernice, I can explain." But his wife wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on Lily, and her face had lost all color. "That girl," Bernice whispered, staggering slightly. "She is." Before she could complete the sentence, Bernice fainted, falling heavily onto the luxurious carpet of the store. Lily's scream echoed through the store while Theodore rushed to help his wife, but a certainty was beginning to form in his mind. This meeting had not been by chance, and something told him that the story about Lily's mother wasn't exactly as the girl believed. In his coat pocket, his cell phone began to vibrate. On the screen, an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. "Mr. Alcott, this is from County General Hospital. It's about a patient named Deborah." County General Hospital was an imposing, 5-story building, but at that moment it seemed even larger and more intimidating to Theodore. With Bernice recovered from her fainting spell, but still dazed in the passenger seat, and Lily asleep in the back seat of the Mercedes, he parked. Near the emergency entrance, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. "Stay with the girl," he said to his wife, who merely nodded, her face a mask of worry and something else he couldn't identify. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen her so disturbed. At the reception desk, the attendant immediately recognized the city's most influential businessman. "Mr. Alcott, I'm glad you came. Dr. Carmen is waiting for you on the 3rd floor." The elevator seemed to move with deliberate slowness. When the doors finally opened, Theodore found a middle-aged woman in a white coat with a serious expression. "Mr. Alcott, I'm Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, head of the ICU. The patient Deborah Martin was admitted 3 days ago in serious condition with severe hypothermia and head trauma. We found your business card in her coat pocket." The card. Theodore instantly remembered that single day, 5 years ago. He had given his personal card to the new secretary, impressed with her competence and dedication. The next day, Bernice appeared unannounced in the office, made a scene, and demanded the young woman's immediate dismissal. He yielded, as he always yielded to his wife's demands, but he retained a twinge of regret for not defending the employee. "She's in a coma," the doctor continued, leading him through the sterile corridor. "But it's a medically induced coma to aid in the recovery from the trauma. What concerns us is that we can't contact any family except the daughter," Theodore completed. "Lily." The doctor stopped abruptly. "You know the girl? We're desperately trying to locate someone who can be responsible for her. Child Protective Services has already been contacted." "No," Theodore replied with a firmness that surprised even himself. "That won't be necessary. I'll take responsibility for the child while her mother is hospitalized." Through the glass of the ICU, Theodore observed Deborah's pale face, connected to various machines. She was older than he remembered, of course, but she maintained that same serene expression that had impressed him in the brief time she worked for him. "Dr. Alcott?" an elderly voice called him. Turning, he saw a woman of about 70, wearing a hospital janitor's uniform. There was something familiar about her face. "Excuse me, but don't you recognize me? I'm Jasmine. I worked in your house." For many years before, recognition hit him like a punch. Jasmine had been a housekeeper in the Alcott mansion for 2 decades, until she was suddenly fired by Bernice when she became pregnant. Another of the episodes he preferred not to question at the time. "Jasmine, do you know Deborah?" the woman hailed, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, sir, she is. She's my daughter." The floor seemed to disappear beneath Theodore's feet. The connections were beginning to form in his mind. Pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed fitting together in a disturbing way. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did Deborah never mention it when she worked for me?" "Because I asked her not to," Jasmine replied, twisting her hands in her apron. "You need to understand. At the time I was fired. There was much more at stake than you realize." Before Theodore could ask any further questions, his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Bernice. "Lily has a high fever. I'm taking her to the pediatric emergency room." Torn between the need to know more and the concern for the girl, Theodore hesitated. Jasmine perceived his dilemma. "Go take care of my granddaughter." "Doctor, but please, we need to talk. There are things you need to know. Things that involve not only Deborah and Lily, but also your mentor, Mr. Augustus." Augustus, the name of the man who had been like a father to Theodore, who had taught him everything about business and life, who was now confined to his mansion, on the outskirts of the city, struggling with advanced age and bitter memories. In the elevator, descending to the emergency room, Theodore felt the weight of decades of secrets and lies on his shoulders. When the doors opened, the scene he found only increased his anguish. Bernice was sitting in a chair, crying copiously, while doctors and nurses rushed Lily, unconscious, into a treatment room. "The fever won't break," Bernice sobbed as he approached. She started to hallucinate, calling for her mother. "Theodore, I can't go through this again." He knew what she was talking about. The son they had lost in childbirth, 15 years ago, who would be the same age as Lily. The loss that had transformed Bernice made her obsessive about control and tormented by irrational jealousy. Nurse approached with a clipboard. "We need the girl's information for admission. Are you the legal guardians?" "Yes," Theodore replied automatically, ignoring Bernice's surprised look. "I take full responsibility." "In that case, I need to inform you that we have just received the results of the initial tests. The girl has severe pneumonia, probably due to exposure to the cold. We'll need to admit her." While he filled out the forms, Theodore noticed a strange movement near the reception desk. A man in his 60s with a private detective badge clipped to his belt was discreetly photographing the scene with a cell phone. When their eyes met, the man quickly put away the device and hurried out. "Who was that man?" he asked Bernice. His wife looked away, but not before he noticed the flash of guilt in her eyes. "Theodore," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. About Deborah, about the day I fired her, and about—" A sharp scream from the treatment room interrupted her confession. It was Lily calling for her mother in the midst of her feverish delirium. At that moment, watching his wife shrink at the sound of the girl's cries, Theodore was certain he was only beginning to scratch the surface of a story much deeper and more painful than he could have imagined. And something told him that the answers he was looking for were in the past, not only his own, but mainly Bernice's. Across the hall, partially hidden behind a pillar, Jasmine watched the scene with silent tears. In her hands, she clutched an old rosary and a faded photograph where a man smiled beside a young pregnant woman. On the back of the photo, a date and a simple message: "Forever yours, Augustus." The night dragged on at the hospital, with Theodore alternating his visits between the ICU, where Deborah remained in a coma, and the pediatric ward, where Lily was battling pneumonia. Bernice had gone home after taking a sedative, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing doubts that plagued him. Around 3 a.m, exhausted after hours of vigil, he decided to go to the hospital cafeteria for a coffee. On the way, he found Jasmine, who was finishing her shift as a janitor. "You look tired," she said, guiding him to a secluded table. "Maybe it's time we talked." Theodore nodded, realizing that this seemingly fragile woman carried the weight of secrets that could change everything. "Why didn't you ever tell me about Deborah?" Jasmine sighed deeply, her wrinkled hands clenching her worn uniform. "Do you remember when I started working at the mansion? It was almost 30 years ago, when Mr. Augustus still lived there." "Of course I remember. Augustus always said you were more than an employee, you were part of the family." "He said that, yes." A sad smile crossed Jasmine's face. "You know, Mr. Theodore, sometimes love appears in the most unexpected places. Augustus was a good man, different from other businessmen. He treated me as an equal. He respected me. And little by little—" "You fell in love," Theodore completed, beginning to understand. It was an impossible love from the beginning. Society would never accept a man of his position with a simple maid. But for a few months, we lived our dream in secret, until I found out I was pregnant. Theodore felt his heart race. Deborah is Augustus's daughter. Jasmine nodded, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. When I told him, Augustus was radiant. He planned to take responsibility for everything, face society, marry me, but then what? Your wife Bernice found out. She had just lost the baby and was distraught. She called me to her room one night and made me an offer, a large sum of money for me to disappear. When I refused, she threatened to tell the press a fabricated story about how I had seduced and blackmailed Augustus. Theodore felt his stomach turn. He knew well the destructive power Bernice could have when she wanted. The scandal would have destroyed Augustus's reputation, Jasmine continued. He was about to close the biggest deal of his life. So I made the most difficult decision. I accepted the money and left, leaving only a letter saying I didn't want to harm him. I never told him I was pregnant. But years later, Deborah came back. She got the job as a secretary. It was a coincidence, Jasmine interrupted. She didn't know who her father was. I never told her. But when Bernice saw her, she must have recognized something. The resemblance to Augustus is undeniable to those who know where to look. At that moment, they were interrupted by a hurried nurse. Mr. Alcott, the girl is calling. For you. The fever has dropped a little and she's lucid. In Lily's room, the little girl was sitting in bed, appearing even more fragile against the crisp, white hospital pillows. Her eyes, however, were alert. Uncle Theodore? She called out in a weak voice. I remember now. Mommy didn't freeze to death. She went out to find help and didn't come back. The landlady said she was found near the woods. Theodore sat beside the bed, holding Lily's warm little hand. Your mother is alive, sweetheart. She's sick, but the doctors are taking care of her. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Really? Can I see her? Not yet, but soon you will. Now tell me, do you know your grandmother? Lily frowned, thoughtful. Mommy always said that Grandma was an angel watching over us from afar. Sometimes she would cry looking at an old picture, but she never showed it to me. Before Theodore could continue the conversation, he noticed a commotion in the hallway. Bernice was back, but she wasn't alone. Beside her, leaning on a cane and looking older than ever, was Augustus. Theodore's heart almost stopped. His mentor, the man who had practically adopted him as a son, hadn't left his house in months. His presence there could only mean one thing. Bernice had told him everything. Where is she? Augustus asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Where's my daughter? But before anyone could answer, an alarm began to sound in the ICU. Over the loudspeakers, an urgent voice called for the medical team. Deborah was having a seizure. Chaos erupted in the hallway. Doctors and nurses ran. Equipment was moved in haste. Amidst the confusion, Theodore saw Bernice stagger and lean against the wall, muttering repeatedly, "It's my fault, it's all my fault." Augustus, for his part, seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. His eyes, fixed in the direction of the ICU, overflowed with an ancient and deep pain. "Mr. Augustus," a soft voice called. It was Jasmine, still in her janitor's uniform, standing a few feet away. "After 30 years, I still recognize your cologne." Time seemed to freeze in that hospital hallway. Theodore watched helplessly as two interrupted love stories, two families separated by lies and secrets, began to reconnect in the most painful way possible. And in the midst of it all, Lily's voice cut through the silence. "Uncle Theodore, why is Aunt Bernice crying? And why is that man looking at my mother's picture like that?" It was then that Theodore noticed. In Augustus's trembling hand was an old photograph, the same one he had seen years ago in his office and which he had always assumed was of an old girlfriend. Now, looking more closely, he recognized the features of Jasmine, young and radiant, smiling at the camera with love in her eyes. The moment was interrupted by the abrupt arrival of Dr. Carmen, her grave face bringing news that no one was prepared to hear. "Mr. Alcott, we need to talk. We found something in Deborah's tests that may explain the accident, something she probably inherited from her father." In the private room of the ICU, Dr. Carmen spread tests on the table while everyone listened in tense silence. Theodore noticed how Augustus gripped his cane so tightly that his knuckles were white. Jasmine remained in a corner, as if wanting to merge with the walls. Bernice didn't stop wringing her hands, her face a mask of guilt and anxiety. "The tests showed a congenital heart condition," the doctor explained, pointing to the images. "It's a rare hereditary condition that causes episodes of severe arrhythmia in situations of extreme stress or exposure to intense cold. That's what caused Deborah's fainting that night, leading to the fall and trauma." Augustus let out a strangled sound. "No, it can't be." "Are you familiar with this condition, Mr. Augustus?" the doctor asked. "My mother, she passed away because of it when I was young. The doctors at the time said it was hereditary, that I could develop the same symptoms. That's why I always had checkups. But I never knew." His voice failed, his eyes fixed on Jasmine. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have protected our daughter." "I didn't know!" Jasmine stepped forward, tears streaming down. "How could I? Do you think that if I knew my daughter was at any risk, I would have kept silent? Do you think it didn't destroy me inside every time she got sick as a child and I couldn't seek proper help for fear of being discovered?" Bernice let out a loud sob, staggering to a chair. "It's my fault, all my fault. If I hadn't interfered—" "What are you talking about?" Theodore approached his wife, his voice hard. "What else did you do besides force Jasmine to leave?" I kept watch over them all these years," confessed Bernice, her voice trembling. "I hired people to monitor them. When Deborah got the job at your company, it wasn't a coincidence. I manipulated everything so that she would be hired." "Why?" Theodore's question came out as a horrified whisper. "Because I needed to make sure she never found out about Augustus. He was like a father to you, Theodore. Our social standing, everything we built, depended on his trust. If the scandal came to light—" "So you fired her," Theodore completed, the pieces falling into place. "But why now? Why allow Augustus to know the truth just now?" The silence that followed was broken by a child's voice. Lily was standing in the doorway, leaning on a nurse. "Mommy always said that the truth has short legs," said the girl with the innocent wisdom of children. "That sooner or later, it catches up with everyone." Augustus got up with difficulty, walking to Lily. He knelt down with effort, ignoring the pain in his aged joints, to be at the girl's height. "You're just like your grandmother when she was young," he said, gently touching Lily's face. "You have the same eyes." The girl tilted her head, curious. "Did you know my grandma when she was young?" "Yes, little one. And I loved your grandma more than anything in this world." Jasmine covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a sob. Theodore realized it was the first time he had heard Augustus openly admit his feelings for her. At that moment, a nurse rushed into the room. "Doctor, the patient. She's reacting. I think she's going to wake up." The news caused immediate commotion. Dr. Carmen ran to the ICU, followed by the entire medical team. Theodore found himself torn between accompanying the group and staying with Lily, but the girl resolved the issue. "Go, Uncle Theodore. I want someone familiar to be there when Mommy opens her eyes." Bernice stood up. "I'll stay with her." "No." Lily's refusal was vehement. "You made my mother cry." "I remember her crying after she left the office that day." Bernice recoiled, as if she had been slapped. Jasmine approached her granddaughter. "I'll stay with you, my love." I've wasted too much time away from my family. In the ICU, Deborah was beginning to show signs of consciousness. Her fingers moved slightly, her eyelids twitched. Theodore and Augustus watched through the glass, both tense with expectation. "Did you know?" Theodore asked finally. "About Bernice having manipulated everything?" Augustus shook his head. "Not directly, but I always suspected there was more to the story of Jasmine's disappearance. Bernice changed a lot after losing the baby. She became obsessive, controlling, I think projecting all her frustrated love onto you, Theodore, was her way of dealing with the loss. That doesn't justify... No, it doesn't justify it, but maybe it helps to understand. The fear of losing people we love can turn us into monsters without us realizing it." Inside the ICU, Deborah opened her eyes. Her gaze, confused at first, wandered around the room until it found Theodore's face. A flash of recognition shone in her features. Where is my daughter?" Her voice was hoarse, weak. "She's safe," Theodore responded, approaching. "She's with her mother." Deborah frowned. "My mother, but..." Her gaze then met Augustus, who had entered the room. For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other in silence. Something in Deborah's face changed, as if an old and buried memory was beginning to emerge. "I have a picture of you," she said slowly. "An old picture that my mother kept. You're smiling, embracing her. I always wondered..." "I'm your father." Augustus's voice failed. "And I spent 30 years without knowing of your existence. Forgive me, daughter. Forgive me for not fighting harder, for not looking for Jasmine. When she left, if I had been stronger..." Theodore realized that he needed to give them privacy. He quietly left the ICU, but in the hallway he found an unexpected scene. Bernice was sitting on the floor, sobbing, while rummaging through an old folder. "What is this?" he asked, approaching. "Reports," she answered between sobs. "All the reports from the investigators I hired to follow Deborah and Jasmine during all these years. Theodore, there's something you need to know. Something terrible." Before she could continue, a scream echoed through the ICU. Deborah was having another seizure. "Code Blue! Code Blue!" Dr. Carmen's voice sounded through the sound system, and the medical team rushed back into the room. Theodore watched helplessly as the doctors fought to stabilize Deborah. Through the glass, he saw Augustus being practically dragged out of the room, his face devastated by the possibility of losing the daughter he had just found. In the middle of the confusion, a paper escaped from Bernice's folder, sliding to Theodore's feet. It was an old photograph, yellowed with time. It showed Bernice, much younger, next to a man he didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, a date and a note that made his blood run cold. "Augustus needs to continue believing that the accident was natural. The secret dies with us." Theodore stared at his wife, who was now trembling uncontrollably. "Bernice, what have you done?" The hospital hallway fell into a heavy silence as Bernice stared at the photograph in Theodore's hands. Her face had lost all color, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. "I was young," she began, her voice almost inaudible. "I had just married you. Augustus was like a father to both of us, and I discovered something that could destroy everything." "What are you talking about?" demanded Theodore, holding the photo so tightly that its edges began to crumple. "The man in the photo is Robert Mendez. He was Augustus's accountant at the time. He discovered irregularities in the company's accounts, documents proving that Jasmine's father, before he passed, was the true owner of half of the business." The revelation hit Theodore like a physical blow. Jasmine's father? Yes. He and Augustus were partners in the beginning, but when he had an accident and was hospitalized, someone, we never found out who, altered the documents. When he passed away, everything was in Augustus's name. "And you discovered this?" "Robert contacted me," Bernice continued, now speaking. quickly, as if the words were escaping against her will. He said he had evidence, that he was going to tell Augustus everything. I panicked. If the truth came to light, it wouldn't just be Augustus's fortune at risk. It would be the entire empire that you were beginning to build with him. Theodore staggered to a chair, his mind spinning with the implications. What did you do, Bernice? I paid Robert to stay silent. I used the money from my inheritance. But then Jasmine showed up pregnant, and I realized that if Augustus married her, if he recognized the baby, everything would come to light. Her daughter would be heir not only to the current fortune, but to everything her grandfather had lost. So you forced her to leave. Theodore's voice was heavy with disgust. It wasn't just out of jealousy or for our social status. It was to prevent the truth about the past from being discovered. You don't understand. Bernice stood up, her eyes feverish. I did it for us, for you. Everything we built, all your success is built on Augustus's fortune, if he found out the truth. They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Carmen, her expression grave but relieved. We managed to stabilize Deborah, but we need to start a specific treatment for the heart condition immediately. It's an experimental procedure, very expensive. I'll pay, declared Theodore without hesitation. Anything she needs. No, Bernice's voice sounded shrill. You can't. If you start using company money to help her, people will ask questions. The press will investigate. Everything will come to light. Enough, thundered an authoritative voice. Augustus was standing in the hallway, leaning on his cane, his face a mask of contained fury. I heard everything, Bernice, every word. The blood seemed to drain from Bernice's face. Mr. Augustus, for 30 years, he continued, his voice trembling with emotion, I carried the guilt for not looking for Jasmine. I believed she had abandoned me, that she didn't love me enough, and all this time, you don't understand, Bernice tried to argue. I was protecting the family legacy. Family, Augustus's voice was now sharp as steel. What family, Bernice? The one you destroyed with your lies? The daughter I took from Jasmine without knowing? The granddaughter I never met? At that moment, they were surprised by a child's cry. Lily was standing at the end of the hallway, clinging to Jasmine's hand, tears streaming down her little face. Why is everyone fighting? She sobbed. I just want my mommy. Jasmine hugged her granddaughter, casting a look of reproval at the adults. Look what you're doing. While you fight over money and power, a child suffers and a young woman fights. For her life, Jasmine's words seemed to awaken something in Augustus. Straightening his shoulders, he walked determinedly to Bernice. I want all the documents, everything you've hidden all these years, and I want it now. But don't make me repeat myself. His voice was icy. You have 1 hour. If you don't bring me everything, I myself will go to the police to report. The fraud you hid. Bernice looked at Theodore, pleading with her eyes, but he looked away. Defeated, she nodded and hurried out of the hospital. In the silence that followed, Augustus approached Jasmine and Lily. He knelt down with difficulty before his granddaughter. Little one, he said softly, I know you're scared and confused, but I need you to know one thing. From now on, you and your mother will lack for nothing. I will fix all the mistakes of the past. Are you my grandfather? Lily asked, sniffing. Really? Yes, my love, and spent too much time away from my family. Jasmine watched the scene with tearful eyes as Dr. Carmen reappeared. Deborah is awake, and she's asking for her daughter. The ICU room was silent except for the constant beeping of the heart monitors. Deborah, still pale but conscious, gave a weak smile when Lily entered. My sweetheart, she whispered, reaching out her hand. Lily ran to embrace her mother, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. Petit to see. Mommy, I thought I had lost you. Never, my angel, I'll never leave you. Theodore watched the scene from the door when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Augustus. We need to talk. said his mentor, about the future, about how we're going to fix 30 years of injustices. What about Bernice? Theodore asked, his heart heavy. She made her choices, Augustus replied firmly. Now she needs to face the consequences. At that moment, Theodore's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number with a photo attached. His heart froze as he recognized Bernice's handwriting. By the time you read this, I'll be far away. Don't look for me. The documents Augustus wants are in the safe behind the painting in our bedroom. The password is the date we lost our baby. Forgive me, Theodore. I truly believed I was protecting our family. Now I see that I destroyed several in the process. As Theodore stared at the message, trying to process yet another twist, a shout echoed through the hallway. It was Josiah, the private investigator, running towards him with an envelope in his hand. Mr. Alcott, you need to see this immediately. I found something about your wife, something that changes everything we thought we knew. Theodore and Augustus followed Josiah to the private waiting room, where the detective spread a series of documents on the table. His hands trembled slightly as he organized the papers. For years I've followed Bernice at her request, he began, but there was something that never left me in peace. Why would a high society woman care so much about monitoring a former employee? And her daughter, her obsession went beyond normal. And what did you find? Theodore asked, his heart racing. The truth about the baby Bernice lost, Josiah replied, separating an old, yellowed folder. Or rather, the baby she didn't lose. The silence that followed was deafening. Augustus leaned heavily on his cane, while Theodore fell into the nearest chair. What are you talking about? Theodore whispered. I found records from the hospital where Bernice gave birth, continued Josiah, showing old documents. The baby was born healthy, a girl, but there were complications during childbirth, and Bernice had a severe hemorrhage. She was unconscious for days. But when she woke up, they said the baby had passed away, protested Theodore, his voice trembling. That's what you and she believed. In fact, while Bernice was unconscious, her father, Richard Albuquerque, made a decision that would change several lives. He gave the child up for adoption. Impossible! Theodore stood up, distraught. Why would he do that? Because, interrupted Augustus, his voice laden with painful understanding, Richard found out about Jasmine's father around that same time. He must have realized that if I discovered the truth about the partnership, I would investigate the entire past of the company. Josiah nodded. Exactly. Richard was involved up to his neck in the fraud that took the shares from Jasmine's father. If the truth came to light, he would lose everything. So he used his daughter's unconsciousness to make a drastic decision. He gave his granddaughter up for adoption and convinced Bernice that the baby had passed away, Theodore completed, horrified, to maintain control over her, to ensure that she would always protect the family secrets. But there's more, said Josiah, picking up another document. I managed to track where the child was taken, and when I found out, well, let's just say that some coincidences are too big to be just coincidences. With trembling hands, the detective showed an old birth certificate. The child's name made Theodore stagger, Deborah Martin. No, he whispered. It can't be. Deborah isn't just Augustus's daughter, confirmed Josiah. She's also Bernice's daughter. Jasmine adopted her without knowing her true origin. The weight of this revelation fell on everyone like an avalanche. Augustus needed to sit down, his breathing heavy. Theodore paced back and forth, trying to process the information. So when Bernice saw Deborah in the office, no, she must have recognized something, said Augustus. A maternal instinct, perhaps. That's why the obsession with keeping Deborah away, with controlling her every step. It wasn't just about protecting the company secret. It was about keeping away from the daughter she believed she had lost. At that moment, they were interrupted by a hurried nurse. Mr. Alcott, something happened to patient Deborah. The initial Panic was quickly replaced by relief when they arrived at the ICU. Deborah was sitting in bed, more flushed than before, with Lily nestled in her arms. Jasmine was beside her, holding her hand. "The tests showed significant improvement," explained Dr. Carmen. "The experimental medication is working better than we expected." Theodore watched the scene through the glass, his heart torn between the joy of seeing Deborah improving and the weight of the revelations he had just discovered. How to tell the truth? How to explain that the woman Deborah believed to be her adoptive mother was actually her aunt, and that her biological mother was the same person who had made her life so difficult? "We can't tell her," said Augustus suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "Not now. Deborah is fragile, recovering. News like that could—" He was interrupted by the sound of heels in the hallway. Bernice was back, carrying a thick old folder. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands trembled as she held the documents. "Here's everything," she said, extending the folder to Augustus. "All the documents about the partnership with Jasmine's father, all the evidence of the fraud. But before you look at them, there's something you need to know." Her gaze wandered to the glass of the ICU, fixing on Deborah. There was so much love and pain in that look that Theodore felt his heart clench. "You already know," he said softly. "Don't you?" Bernice nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I always knew. From the first day I saw her in the office. A mother never forgets her daughter's face, even if she's only seen it once, shortly after birth. Why didn't you tell me?" Theodore's voice was choked. "Because guilt consumed me," she replied. "The guilt for not being strong enough to stop my father, for believing the lie about the loss, for allowing my daughter to grow up without knowing who she really was. And then it was too late. How to explain 30 years of silence?" The moment was interrupted by a noise coming from the room. Deborah was having another seizure, stronger than the previous ones. "She needs an urgent procedure!" Dr. Carmen shouted. "But it's risky in her condition. We need the family's authorization." Bernice took a step forward automatically, but stopped. She looked at Jasmine, who was hugging a weeping Lily, and then at Augustus. "You're her mother," said Augustus softly. "Regardless of what happened in the past, now you have the chance to do the right thing." With tears in her eyes, Bernice signed the authorization. While the medical team prepared Deborah for the procedure, she approached the glass, placing her hand on the cold surface. "Daughter," she whispered, "forgive your mother for not being strong enough before, but now I am, and I won't lose you again." In the hallway, Theodore found a photo that had fallen from the folder of documents. It showed Richard Albuquerque, young, shaking hands with another man in front of an old building. On the back, a handwritten note that made his blood run cold. "Deal closed with Robert Mendez. The body will never be found." When he raised his eyes from the photo, he saw Josiah waving frantically from the end of the hallway, more documents in his hands. The mystery, apparently, was far from over. Josiah led Theodore and Augustus to a private room at the end of the hallway, away from prying eyes. The detective trembled slightly as he organized a new series of documents on the table. "What I discovered about Robert Mendez is not even the tip of the iceberg," he said, separating some old photos. "Richard Albuquerque built an empire based on fraud and manipulation, but his greatest crime was what he did to his own family." "What are you talking about?" Theodore asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. "I found records of a private clinic in Phoenix," explained Josiah. "Around the time Bernice gave birth, Richard made several suspicious deposits to doctors and nurses. He not only forged the baby's death, he orchestrated an entire scheme to ensure that his daughter would never discover the truth." "But why?" questioned Augustus. "Why separate mother and daughter so cruelly?" "Because Bernice had discovered something," replied Josiah, pulling out a yellowed envelope. Something that could destroy Richard. I found this letter hidden among the old company documents. The letter, handwritten by Bernice weeks before the birth, revealed that she had found evidence that her father was involved in the disappearance of Jasmine's father. Richard had manipulated documents, illegally transferred shares, and when the partner threatened to denounce him, ensured his permanent silence. So, when Bernice went into labor, continued Josiah, Richard saw his opportunity. He used his daughter's vulnerability to silence her in the cruelest way possible, taking from her what she held most and precious, and ensuring that she would spend the rest of her life protecting the family's secrets, completed Theodore, feeling nauseous, for fear that the truth about the baby would come to light. Exactly. But he made a mistake, said Josiah, separating more documents. He entrusted the baby to Jasmine through a corrupt social worker without knowing that she had a connection to Augustus. He never imagined that his granddaughter would end up returning to the family circle. The silence that followed was interrupted by a sound coming from the ICU. Deborah's heart monitors showed worrying changes. "The procedure is more complicated than we imagined," explained Dr. Carmen, quickly leaving the room. "We need a specific type of medication that we don't have at the hospital. It only exists in a clinic in Phoenix." "I'll get it," offered Theodore immediately. "There's no time," said the doctor. "We need the medication in a maximum of 2 hours." "I can send my helicopter," said Augustus, already picking up the phone. At that moment, Bernice entered the room. Her face was pale, but there was a steely determination in her eyes. "I know where to get the medication right here in Chicago," she said. "My father, he keeps a private stock in his mansion for his heart problem." Everyone turned to her, surprised. "How do you know that?" asked Theodore. "Because it's the same condition," replied Bernice, her voice trembling. "The same one that took my mother, the same one that Deborah inherited. That's why my father keeps a stock of the medication. He always knew it was hereditary." The revelation landed like a bomb. Richard had not only separated mother and daughter, he had deliberately withheld vital medical information that could have helped Deborah throughout her life. "I'll go there," said Bernice, grabbing her purse. "No," interrupted Theodore. "I'm going with you. Your father needs some answers." As they prepared to leave, Lily appeared in the doorway, her little eyes red from crying. "Uncle Theodore," she called out in a small voice, "promise you'll save my mummy." Theodore knelt before her, feeling his heart clench. "I promise, sweetheart. And when all this is over, you're going to have more family than you imagine." In the car, on the way to the Albuquerque mansion, Bernice remained silent, but her hands didn't stop trembling. "Why didn't you ever tell me," Theodore asked finally, "about your suspicions when you first saw Deborah?" "Because I was afraid," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Afraid of being wrong, of seeing things where they didn't exist. And then, after I confirmed the truth, the fear only increased." How to explain 30 years of silence? They arrived at the Albuquerque mansion as the sun began to set. The imposing construction, with its perfectly manicured gardens, seemed to mock the tragedy it held within its walls. Richard Albuquerque, at 75 years old, still maintained the authoritarian posture that characterized him. He was in his office when Theodore and Bernice entered unannounced. "What does this invasion mean?" he asked, irritated. "We need the medication, Dad," said Bernice, her voice firm, "for Deborah." Richard's face paled for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Theodore intervened, stepping forward. "You know very well, just as you knew about the heart condition, just as you knew you were condemning your own granddaughter to a life of risk by hiding the truth about her health." "You don't understand," said Richard, his voice trembling slightly. "I did what needed to be done, to protect the family. The Albuquerque name." "No," shouted Bernice. "You didn't do it for the family. You did it to protect yourself, to hide your crimes, your frauds, using your own daughter and granddaughter as pawns in your dirty game." At that moment, Theodore's cell phone rang. It was Augustus. "Come quickly," his voice was urgent. "Deborah has gotten worse. Dr. Carmen says that without the medication in the next half hour." Bernice didn't wait for the end of the sentence. With a strength that Theodore had never seen in her, she advanced to a painting on the wall, revealing a safe behind it. "The password, Dad, now!" "You can't—" "The password!" Bernice's shout echoed through the office. "Or I swear I'll go to the police right now to tell everything I know about what happened to Jasmine's father." Richard's eyes widened in fear. For the first time, Theodore saw the powerful businessman falter. 4971, he muttered, defeated. Inside the safe, besides the medication, there was an old folder. When Bernice opened it, a photo fell to the floor. It showed a young Jasmine with her father, smiling in front of the old company headquarters. On the back, a note, "So that we never forget who really built this empire." Theodore grabbed the medication and the photo, but before leaving, he turned to Richard. This is over," he said coldly. "When Deborah is out of danger, you're going to answer for everything you've done." In the car, speeding back to the hospital, Bernice held the photo of Jasmine and her father, silent tears streaming down her face. "You know what's worse?" she said softly. "During all these years, I thought I was protecting our family, but in reality, I was just perpetuating a chain of lies and betrayals that started long before me." When they arrived at the hospital, they found another surprise. Josiah was in the hallway holding a sealed envelope with the notary's letterhead. "I found the original will of Jasmine's father," he said, breathless. "You won't believe what's written here." Dr. Carmen quickly administered the medication to Deborah while everyone waited in tense silence. Lily had finally fallen asleep in Jasmine's arms, exhausted after hours of crying. Augustus kept his eyes fixed on his daughter through the glass of the ICU, as if he could protect her just with his gaze. Theodore held the envelope that Josiah had brought, feeling the weight of the history that those documents held. Bernice was sitting in a corner, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. The will was hidden in an old safe in the notary's basement, explained Josiah. The notary at the time received money to file it in a place where it would never be found, but he kept a coded record of its location. With trembling hands, Theodore opened the envelope. The document, yellowed with time, was perfectly preserved. As he read, his face grew paler and paler. "Jasmine's father," he began, his voice hoarse, "was not only the majority partner in the company. He had a plan for the future that no one knew about." Everyone gathered closer to listen except Jasmine, who remained with Lily asleep in her arms. "He knew he was being threatened," Theodore continued. "That's why he prepared this will in secret. In it, he stipulates that his share in the company should be divided into three, 1/3 for Jasmine, 1/3 for Augustus, and 1/3 for a foundation that should be created in his wife's name." "What foundation?" asked Augustus, frowning. "A foundation for research and treatment of hereditary heart diseases," replied Theodore, his voice trembling. "He knew about the condition that affected the women in the family. His wife had passed away because of it. He wanted to use the company's fortune to find a cure." Bernice let out a strangled sob. "So, all this time, the money my father stole should have been saving lives, saving my own daughter?" "There's more," said Josiah, picking up other documents from his folder. "I found records that weeks before his accident, Jasmine's father had initiated contact with international researchers. He was close to establishing a revolutionary research program. And Richard destroyed all of that," murmured Augustus, his voice laden with disgust. At that moment, they were interrupted by Dr. Carmen, who came out of Deborah's room with a tired smile. "The medication is working," she announced. "The heart rate is stabilizing. The blood pressure is normalizing. I think the worst is over." The collective relief was almost palpable. Jasmine began to cry silently, waking Lily in the process. "Mommy's going to be okay?" asked the girl, sleepy. "Yes, my love," replied Jasmine, kissing her forehead. "And now we're going to be able to take care of her properly." Bernice stood up suddenly, her face determined despite the tears. "I know what we need to do," she said. "How to fix, at least. In part, the harm my father caused." Everyone turned to her, curious. "The mansion where my father keeps the medication. It's not just a house. It's a private research center. For years, he financed secret studies on the heart condition, not to help other people, but to ensure his own survival." "How do you know that?" asked Theodore. "Because I found the laboratories," she replied. "Last week, when I went to get the medication for him, there's an entire wing hidden in the basement with modern equipment, research results, everything that Jasmine's father dreamed of building." The revelation caused a stir. Augustus leaned heavily on his cane, while Jasmine hugged Lily tighter. "But it's not just that," continued Bernice. "I also found records of other families, dozens of them, all affected by the same condition. My father had been monitoring these people, collecting data for his private research without ever offering help." "Monstrous," murmured Augustus. "That's why we need to act now," said Bernice, her voice gaining strength. "While my father is vulnerable, while we have proof of everything, we can not only recover what he stole, but transform that place into the research center it should have been from the beginning." Theodore watched his wife with a mixture of admiration and sadness. This was a Bernice he had never known, strong, determined to do the right thing, even if it meant destroying her own father. "It won't be easy," warned Josiah. "Richard has powerful connections, expensive lawyers, but he no longer has power over me," interrupted Bernice. "Not now that I know the truth about my daughter, about all the harm he caused." At that moment, a soft sound came from Deborah's room. She was waking up, her eyes opening slowly. Where is my daughter?" she asked, her voice weak. Lily ran to the room, followed by Jasmine. Bernice stood at the door, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched the daughter she could never raise. "There's something I need to tell you, Deborah," said Jasmine softly, holding her daughter's hand. "About your origins, about your true family." But before she could continue, a commotion in the hallway caught everyone's attention. A nurse was running towards them, agitated. "Dr. Carmen, we just received the results of the patient's latest tests. There's something you need to see immediately." The doctor took the papers, her face changing expression as she read. When she raised her eyes, there was a strange gleam in her gaze. "This is impossible," she murmured. "In 30 years of career, I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Carmen quickly entered Deborah's room, followed by the entire medical team. Their eyes alternated between the patient and the tests in their hands, as if trying to confirm something unbelievable. "The medication they brought from the Albuquerque mansion," she began, "is not just a common treatment for cardiac arrhythmia. It's something much more advanced, something I've never seen in my entire career." "What do you mean?" asked Augustus, approaching. "The results show a regeneration of the cardiac tissue," explained the doctor. "Not just an improvement of the symptoms, but a true structural recovery. It's as if the heart is healing from the inside out." Bernice paled. "My father, he had access to this medication all this time, while other people suffered from the same condition?" "Not only had access," interjected Josiah, rummaging through his folder. "I found more documents in the secret laboratory. Richard had been funding experimental research for years, testing different compounds. He turned the search for the cure into a private business." At that moment, Deborah tried to sit up in bed, supported by Jasmine, her eyes still tired but more alert, fixed on Bernice. "I remember you," she said softly. "From the day you fired me, there was something strange in your eyes, as if you knew me." Bernice began to tremble, silent tears streaming down her face. Jasmine squeezed Deborah's hand, taking a deep breath. "Daughter," she began, "there's something you need to know. About your birth. About your true origin." For almost an hour, amidst tears and sobs, the story was told. Deborah listened in silence, her face a mask of contradictory emotions. Lily, sitting on the edge of the bed, held her mother's hand tightly. "So," said Deborah finally, her voice trembling, "you're my biological mother, and the mother who raised me, who loved me all these years, is actually my aunt?" "Jasmine raised you like a true mother," replied Bernice, her voice choked. "She gave you all the love that I should have given, but couldn't, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it." A heavy silence fell on the room, broken only by the constant beeping of the heart monitors. "I don't know if I can forgive," said Deborah finally. "Not yet, but I understand. I understand that you were also a victim, that we were all pawns in a cruel game orchestrated by Richard." At that moment, Lily stood up in bed, her little eyes shining with unshed tears. "Does that mean I have two grandmas now?" she asked innocently. The child's simple question broke the tension in the room. Deborah smiled for the first time, pulling her daughter into a hug. "Yes, my love, you have a much bigger family than we imagined." Theodore, who had been watching the scene in silence, was suddenly called by Josiah in the hallway. The detective had a grave expression. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said, showing more documents. "About the real reason why Richard kept all this research secret. The papers revealed something even more sinister. The experimental medication was not just a treatment, it was a potential cure. A cure that, if disclosed, could save thousands of lives. But Richard had realized that he could profit much more by keeping people dependent on continuous treatments. He turned people's suffering into a business, murmured Theodore, disgusted. "And not only that," continued Josiah, "I found records of families who sought help over the years. Families who discovered the research and begged for access to the treatment. Richard not only denied help, he actively worked to prevent these people from getting treatment elsewhere." At that moment, they were interrupted by a shout from the room. It was Lily, pointing to the window. In the hospital parking lot, Richard Albuquerque was getting out of his limousine, accompanied by a group of men in suits. "They're lawyers," said Josiah, recognizing some faces. "Some of the most expensive in the country." Bernice quickly left the room, her face determined. "I won't allow him to destroy more lives," she declared. "No more secrets, no more manipulations." Augustus approached, leaning on his cane. "You're not alone in this fight," he said. "I have my own connections, my own resources. We can transform that secret laboratory into something good, something that really helps people." Jasmine, who had followed Bernice to the hallway, added, "And I have all the letters that your father exchanged with mine before the accident. Letters that prove the original partnership, that show how it all began." Theodore watched the movement in the lobby through the window. Richard seemed smaller now, less imposing, surrounded by his lawyers like a scared child hiding behind his parents' legs. "He's afraid," Theodore realized. For the first time in his life, Richard Albuquerque is really afraid. Inside the room, Deborah held Lily close to her chest, both watching the scene unfold. The girl looked at her mother, her eyes full of wisdom beyond her age. "You know, Mommy," she said softly, "the teacher at school said that sometimes we need to forgive people, even when they did bad things. Not for them, but for ourselves." Deborah kissed her daughter's forehead, silent tears streaming down her face. When did you get so wise, sweetheart? In the hallway, Theodore picked up his phone, dialing a number he never thought he would use. "Robert," he said when the call was answered. "This is Theodore Alcott. I think it's time you told your part in this story." On the other end of the line, a heavy sigh. "Finally," replied Robert Mendez. "I thought this day would never come." The hospital lobby had turned into a silent arena. On one side, Richard Albuquerque and his lawyers. On the other, Theodore, Bernice, Augustus, and Jasmine. In the middle, Dr. Carmen watched everything with evident concern, fearing that the tension would affect Deborah's recovery. "I've come to get what belongs to me," declared Richard, his voice cold. "The medications you stole from my house are private property, the result of years of research and investment." "An investment?" Bernice's voice trembled with indignation. "Is that what you call the money you stole from Jasmine's father? The money that should have been used to help people with the same condition that affects our family?" One of the lawyers stepped forward holding a folder. "We have a court order here," he said in a monotonous voice, "demanding the immediate return of all experimental medication and related documentation." It was then that the hospital doors opened and Robert Mendez entered, accompanied by Josiah. The former accountant seemed to have aged decades since the last time Theodore had seen him, but his eyes shone with determination. "That order is worthless," declared Robert, pulling his own folder out of his briefcase. "Not when the origin of the research and the funding is the product of fraud." Richard paled visibly. You can't prove anything." "I can prove everything," replied Robert, spreading documents on the reception desk. "I kept copies of every transaction, every forged document, every threat you made over the years, including—" He paused, pulling a sealed envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket, "including the proof that the accident of Jasmine's father was not accidental." Chaos erupted in the lobby. Richard's lawyers began to whisper furiously among themselves. While Jasmine let out a strangled sob, Augustus supported her before she fell. "Why now?" Theodore asked Robert. "Why did you decide to reveal everything after so long?" "None." The former accountant looked at Lily, who was watching everything from the door of Deborah's room. "Because I got tired of carrying this weight," he replied simply. "When I saw in the newspapers about the girl found in the cold, when I found out she was Jasmine's granddaughter, I realized that the cycle of lies needed to end." At that moment, Dr. Carmen approached with more tests in her hands. "Gentlemen, I know you have a lot to resolve, but I need to inform you of something important," she said, her professional tone barely masking her excitement. "The latest analyses of the experimental medication show something extraordinary. It's not just a treatment, it's a potential cure, and not only the hereditary heart condition, but possibly for several other cardiac diseases." The revelation landed like a bombshell in the lobby. Richard staggered, needing to lean on one of his lawyers. "That's why you hid the research," said Bernice, finally understanding. "It wasn't just about Jasmine's father's money. It was about the profit potential that a cure like that represented." "You don't understand," Richard tried to argue, his voice weak, "the power that this discovery represents. In the wrong hands." "In the wrong hands?" interrupted Augustus, his voice thundering through the lobby. "Like in your hands, you mean, using the suffering of innocent people to profit?" It was then that Deborah, supported by a nurse, appeared at the door of her room. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with an inner strength that no one had seen before. "I want to see," she said firmly. "I want to see all the documents, all the evidence. I want to understand exactly how my life and the lives of so many others were manipulated by greed." Richard looked at the granddaughter he never knew, and something in his face changed. For the first time, a shadow of something resembling regret crossed his features. "You look so much like your grandmother," he murmured, "like my wife. She also suffered from this condition, also begged for a cure. And yet, interrupted Bernice, when you finally found a possibility of a cure, you hid it from the world. You turned it into a private business. In the name of what, Dad? Money, power. Richard's response was cut short by the abrupt arrival of more people in the lobby. It was a news crew, led by a journalist that Theodore recognized as one of the most respected in the state. "How did they find out?" whispered one of the lawyers in a panic. "I called them," declared Josiah. "It's time for the truth to come out. All of it." The journalist approached, microphone in hand, but before she could begin her questions, Lily escaped from the room and ran to Richard. The girl stopped before the great-grandfather she had never met, her large eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. "Are you sick in your heart too?" she asked innocently. "Is that why you kept all the medicine just for you?" The child's simple question seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. He staggered, needing to sit in one of the reception chairs. "No, little one," he replied, his voice broken. "My heart is sick in a way that no medicine can cure." The journalist had begun to broadcast live, capturing every word of the interaction. In the hallways, hospital staff and patients stopped to watch the drama unfold. It was then that Robert Mendez stepped forward, opening his folder on the reception desk. "I think it's time to tell the story from the beginning," he said, picking up the oldest document. "A story that began more than 30 years ago, when two men dreamed of building something that could save lives." Dr. Carmen, who had left momentarily, returned with an urgent expression. "Before we continue," she interrupted, "there's one more thing you need to know. Something we discovered in Deborah's latest tests and that changes everything we thought we knew about this condition." Dr. Carmen held the new tests with slightly trembling hands, her face alternating between professional excitement and human concern. "Deborah's latest tests revealed something extraordinary," she began, spreading the images on the reception desk. "The heart condition that affects the women in the family is not exactly a disease. It's a rare genetic mutation that, under the right circumstances, can actually strengthen the heart." "What do you mean?" asked Bernice, approaching to see the tests. "The experimental medication that Richard developed is not just a treatment," explained the doctor. "It activates a regeneration mechanism that already exists naturally in the bodies of these women. In other words, you are not born with a disease. You are born with an extraordinary healing potential that, if properly stimulated, can revolutionize the treatment of heart diseases." The impact of this revelation was immediate. Richard sank even further into his chair while the journalists approached, capturing every word. "So," said Jasmine slowly, "all these years of suffering, all the women in the family we lost, could have been saved," completed Dr. Carmen. "More than that, could have helped save thousands of other lives." Deborah, who had approached, supported by a nurse, looked at Lily with new eyes. "My daughter, she also—" "Yes," confirmed the doctor. "She carries the same potential, but unlike previous generations, she won't have to suffer, not if we use this knowledge in the right way." It was then that Robert Mendez picked up a specific document from his folder. "This explains it," he said, his voice trembling. "This explains why Jasmine's father was so determined to create that research center. He wasn't just trying to save his family. He was trying to use this unique trait to benefit humanity." "And I destroyed that," murmured Richard, speaking more to himself than to the others. "I turned a gift into a curse." The journalist approached Richard with the microphone, but was interrupted by Lily, who again placed herself before her great-grandfather. "If you did something wrong," she said, with the simplicity of childhood, "why don't you try to do something right now?" The hospital lobby fell into absolute silence. All attention turned to the powerful businessman and the little girl who stared at him without fear. Richard looked at Lily for a long moment. Then his eyes scanned the faces of everyone present. Bernice, his daughter that he had manipulated so cruelly. Deborah, the granddaughter he had denied the chance to know. Jasmine, whose life he had destroyed. Augustus, the man he had betrayed. "Maybe," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper, "maybe there's still time to fix some mistakes." Slowly, with trembling hands, he began to take papers from his own jacket. "These are the patents," he explained. "All the formulas, all the studies, and this..." He removed a flash drive from his pocket. "This contains all the records of the families who sought help over the years. Hundreds of them, scattered throughout the country, people who could have been saved." Dr. Carmen took the flash drive with reverence. "With this information," she said, "we can not only develop more effective treatments, but potentially create a research network connecting all these families, a genetic database that could revolutionize cardiology." Bernice stepped forward, facing her father. "It's not enough," she declared. "It's not enough just to hand over the information. We need to ensure that this research will never again be used for private profit." "I agree," said Augustus, leaning on his cane. "I propose to transform the secret laboratory into a public research institute, a place where anyone with this condition can find help." "The Martins Institute," suggested Jasmine softly, "in memory of my father." At that moment, one of Richard's lawyers cleared his throat, calling attention. "Mr. Albuquerque," he said nervously, "I need to warn you that any public confession can have serious legal consequences." "Enough!" interrupted Richard, raising his hand. "Enough hiding, enough manipulating. My great-granddaughter is right. It's time to do something right." He stood up with difficulty, walking to Deborah. "I never asked you for forgiveness," he said, his voice choked. "I never asked anyone for forgiveness. Maybe it's too late, but..." He was interrupted by a sharp alarm coming from Deborah's room. The heart monitors showed worrying changes. "It's a reaction to the medication," exclaimed Dr. Carmen, running to the room. "We need to stabilize her." In the chaos that followed, with doctors and nurses running, Theodore noticed something strange. Josiah was in a corner, talking urgently on the phone. When the detective hung up, his face was pale. "Theodore," he called in a low voice, "I just received some information about another secret laboratory, one where Richard kept something even more precious than the medication." "What are you talking about?" "Records," replied Josiah. "Records of tests on patients, tests that started much earlier than we imagined, and that involved..." His voice faltered when his eyes landed on Lily, who was crying in Jasmine's arms as she watched the doctors attending to her mother. "That involved children," he completed in a whisper. "Children with the same genetic condition." Theodore felt his blood run cold. When he turned to confront Richard, he realized that the businessman had disappeared from the lobby, leaving only his disoriented lawyers behind. In Deborah's room, Dr. Carmen struggled to stabilize her patient, while a new and terrible truth threatened to come to light. A truth that could change everything they thought they knew about Richard Albuquerque and his secret experiments. The tension in the hospital reached its peak as the medical team fought to stabilize Deborah. Lily sobbed in Jasmine's arms, while Bernice watched the scene with a mixture of horror and guilt. Theodore pulled Josiah into a more secluded corner, needing to better understand the extent of this new revelation. "What exactly did you discover about these children?" he asked in a low voice. "These are records that go back 20 years, explained Josiah, flipping through a file on his tablet. Richard maintained a secret program for identifying children with the same genetic condition. He monitored them through a network of private doctors, collecting data on how the mutation manifested at different ages. He was experimenting on these children? "Not directly," replied Josiah, But he used their medical information to refine his research. The most disturbing thing is that I found evidence that he actively prevented some families from having access to conventional treatments, just to observe the natural development of the condition. At that moment, Dr. Carmen came out of Deborah's room, her face showing relief. "We managed to stabilize her," she announced, "but we discovered something interesting. Her body is not only responding to the treatment, it's adapting to it, improving it. It's as if her body is learning to naturally produce the compounds that the medication contains." The news caused a stir among those present. Bernice approached the doctor, her eyes shining with a sudden idea. "Doctor," she said, "my father always said that I was lucky for never having developed the symptoms of the condition. What if I wasn't lucky? What if he had been medicating me secretly since childhood?" The theory made everyone turn to her. Augustus was the first to speak. "It makes sense. Richard has always been obsessed with protecting you, with keeping you under his control. What better way to ensure your dependence than to make you need a medication that only he could provide?" Dr. Carmen took her tablet, quickly accessing Bernice's medical record. "We need to do specific tests to confirm, but this would explain a lot. If you've been exposed to the medication since childhood, your body may have naturally developed the protection mechanisms that we're trying to stimulate in Deborah artificially." It was then that Lily, who had calmed down a bit, broke free from Jasmine's arms and walked to the center of the group. "The man at the grocery store near my house," she said in a small voice, "always gave Mommy some different medicines. He said it was a vitamin, that it was a gift. Mommy didn't want to accept, but he insisted." Josiah immediately began typing on his tablet. "I found it!" he exclaimed. "The grocery store belongs to a shell company registered in the name of one of Richard's trusted employees. He was medicating Deborah without her knowing." "And not only her," completed Robert Mendez, who had been reviewing the documents in silence. "I found records of dozens of small businesses scattered throughout the city, all linked to Richard's ghost companies. He created an entire network to distribute the medications secretly." The revelation landed like a bomb. Bernice staggered, needing to lean on a chair. "He wasn't just researching the cure," she murmured. "He was creating his own study population, controlling who received treatment and who didn't, playing God with people's lives." At that moment, Deborah woke up. Her weak voice caught everyone's attention. "There's more," she said, trying to sit up in bed. "I remember now. When I was a child, before Jasmine adopted me, I was in a strange place. A place with other children, all doing medical exams." Jasmine paled. "The orphanage. The orphanage where I found you wasn't an ordinary orphanage, was it?" "It was one of Richard's research facilities," confirmed Josiah, consulting his files. "He used foster care institutions as a front to monitor children with the genetic condition." Dr. Carmen, who had been examining more test results, suddenly raised her head with an expression of astonishment. "My God," she whispered, "if this is true, if Richard really created such an extensive distribution network of the medication, we need to find these people immediately. The sudden interruption of treatment could be fatal." As if to confirm her words, Josiah's cell phone began to ring insistently. They were news alerts. Hospitals in the region were reporting a sudden increase in patients with severe cardiac symptoms. "He disappeared with all the stock," said Theodore, understanding the gravity of the situation. "When he fled the hospital, Richard must have ordered the interruption of all medication distribution. Not only that," added Robert, raising a document, "he started transferring large sums to accounts abroad. He's preparing his escape from the country." Bernice stood up abruptly, a steely determination in her eyes. "I won't allow him to make more victims," she declared. "No more secrets, no more manipulations. Augustus approached, leaning on his cane. "I know where he keeps his passport, his emergency documents. I know exactly where he's going." Before she could complete, she was interrupted by a cry from Lily. The girl pointed to the hospital window, where a helicopter had just landed on the helipad. "It's Grandpa Richard's helicopter," she exclaimed, "just like the one I saw in the picture at the mansion." Everyone ran to the window, in time to see Richard boarding hurriedly, carrying a briefcase that certainly contained much more than documents. "He's going to destroy everything," murmured Bernice. "He's going to take with him all the research, all the evidence." It was then that Augustus, who had remained strangely calm, stepped forward. "No," he said firmly, "not this time." With slightly trembling hands, he took out his own cell phone and dialed a number. "Authorize the operation," he said simply before hanging up. Everyone stared at him in surprise, except Robert, who displayed a small smile of understanding. "What did you do?" asked Theodore. "Something I should have done 30 years ago," replied Augustus. "Something that Jasmine's father asked me to do in his last letter, in case everything went wrong." At that moment, sirens began to sound in the distance, approaching the hospital rapidly. Richard's helicopter had not yet taken off when 3 vehicles from the Department of Health entered the hospital parking lot, followed by a team from the FDA. Augustus watched the scene with a calm that contrasted with the general agitation. "Jasmine's father's last letter," he explained finally, "contained more than revelations about the partnership. It also had specific instructions on how to proceed if something happened to him, including details about an investigation he had been conducting secretly into irregular practices in medical research." "You kept that investigation active all these years?" asked Theodore, impressed. "Not only did I keep it active, I expanded it. I built a network of contacts in regulatory agencies. I kept people monitoring every suspicious movement of Richard. I was just waiting for the right moment, the right evidence." Bernice, who watched her father being approached by the agents at the helipad, felt her legs give way. Theodore supported her before she fell. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked Augustus. "Why keep this secret for so long?" "Because you were still loyal to your father," he replied softly. "You needed to arrive at the truth on your own, and now you have." Dr. Carmen, who had left quickly to answer a phone call, returned with urgent news. "The clandestine distribution network was even larger than we imagined," she said, consulting her notes. "We are receiving reports from hospitals in 3 states. Hundreds of people depended on this medication without knowing its true origin. But now we have the formula," reminded Bernice. "We can produce more, distribute it properly." "It's not that simple," interrupted the doctor. "The production is complex, requires specific equipment, and most importantly, each batch needs to be adapted to the patient's genetic profile. Richard wasn't just distributing a medication, he was collecting data and adjusting the formula continuously." It was then that Deborah, who had managed to get up with the help of a nurse, stepped forward. Maybe I can help," she said hesitantly. "Since I started taking the medication, I've been having strange dreams. They're not really dreams. They're more like memories. From the time I spent in that place with the other children." Everyone turned to her, intrigued. "I remember rooms with large equipment, glass tubes with colored liquids, and mainly I remember the notes. There were whiteboards on the walls, covered in chemical formulas. I was too young to understand, but for some reason they remained etched in my mind." Dr. Carmen approached, excited. "Would you be able to reproduce those formulas?" "I think so," replied Deborah. "It's as if they're part of me, as if my own body understands what they mean." "The genetic mutation," murmured the doctor. "It doesn't just affect the heart. It also affects the cognitive functions related to body chemistry. That's why your body is adapting the medication, improving it. You're not just a patient, Deborah. You're the key to understanding the whole process." At that moment, Lily, who was sitting quietly observing everything, stood, up suddenly. "Mommy!" she called. "It's snowing!" Everyone turned to the window. Indeed, small white flakes began to fall from the sky, a very rare phenomenon in that region of Chicago. "The weather is changing," said Jasmine softly, "just like our lives." At the helipad, Richard was being led back to the hospital by the agents. His face was pale, but there was something different in his expression, as if a great weight had been taken off his shoulders. When he passed by the group gathered in the hallway, he stopped for a moment. His eyes met those of Lily, who watched him without fear. "You know," said the girl, "my teacher always says that when we do something wrong, we need to try to fix it, even if it takes a very long time." Richard closed his eyes, a solitary tear running down his aged face. "Your teacher is a wise woman," he replied softly. Then, turning to the agents, "There's a safe in the basement of the mansion. The password is the date of birth of my granddaughter Deborah. There you will find everything. All the records, all the original formulas, all the names of the people I helped and of those I let suffer." Bernice stepped forward, facing her father. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why now?" "Because," he replied, looking at Lily, "maybe there's still time to do something right, something that honors the memory of all those I sacrificed along the way." As Richard was led away, Dr. Carmen received an urgent call on her cell phone. Her face lit up as she heard the news. "The first results of Deborah's new tests have arrived," she announced, "and you won't believe what we discovered." But before she could continue, a sound of running in the hallway caught everyone's attention. A nurse was running, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Doctor!" she called breathlessly. "You need to see this." The tests of the other patients with the same condition, all of them. It's as if their bodies are communicating in some way. Dr. Carmen took the new tests, her eyes scanning the results quickly. When she raised her face, there was an expression of awe on her features. "My God," she whispered, "it's not just a genetic mutation, it's much more than that. It's as if—" Her voice faltered when a new set of results was placed in her hands. Whatever she saw there caused her to lean against the wall, her legs unsteady. "What is it?" asked Theodore, concerned. "What did you discover?" The doctor looked at each of those present before answering, her voice barely containing the emotion. "I think we just discovered why Richard kept this secret for so long, why he was so obsessed with controlling everything. What we have here can change not only the treatment of heart diseases, but our entire understanding about the human body." A month had passed since that fateful night at the hospital. The snow that had fallen in Chicago had melted, but the changes it symbolized were permanent. The immense garden of the Albuquerque mansion, formerly restricted and private, was now full of people, patients, doctors, researchers, all gathered for the official inauguration of the Martins Institute for Cardiac Research. Deborah, completely recovered, was standing on the small improvised stage, Lily at her side, both smiling at the audience. Her transformation was remarkable, not only physical, but mainly emotional. The fragile young woman who struggled to survive had become a strong, confident woman, a key player in the revolution that was taking place in medicine. "What we discovered," she began her speech, "goes far beyond a simple genetic mutation. What we used to call a disease is actually a gift, an extraordinary ability of the human body to adapt, evolve, and more importantly, to communicate." Dr. Carmen, sitting in the front row, nodded enthusiastically. The last few weeks had confirmed her boldest theories. The women with the special condition not only responded to the treatment, they perfected it, their bodies working in a kind of invisible network of collective healing. "When one of us receives the treatment," continued Deborah, "our bodies learn not only to heal themselves, but to transmit that information to other people with the same condition. It's like a biological neural network, sharing knowledge at a cellular level. In the audience, Bernice held Jasmine's hand, silent tears streaming down both their faces. Beside them, Augustus smiled with paternal pride. Theodore, standing near the stage, could hardly believe the transformation he had witnessed in the last month. Richard's former secret laboratory had been completely remodeled. The dark and claustrophobic rooms gave way to open and welcoming spaces. Where before there was secrecy and fear, now there was transparency and hope. "But our greatest discovery," said Deborah, pausing dramatically, "happened when we began to research deeply into Richard's files. What he considered his greatest threat was, in fact, our greatest gift, the ability to heal ourselves collectively." She gestured, and a large screen behind her lit up, showing graphs and images of tests. "The more people with our condition come together, the stronger our healing capacity becomes. We no longer need complex medications or invasive treatments, we just need each other." In the last row, almost hidden among the guests, was Richard. Even under house arrest, he had received special permission to attend the inauguration. His face showed a complex mixture of regret and relief. "The Martins Institute," continued Deborah, "will not only be a research center. It will be a place of meeting, of collective healing, of hope. And most importantly, it will be free and accessible to everyone who needs it." The audience applauded enthusiastically. Lily, beside her mother, smiled with pride. At 6 years old, she already showed signs of the same extraordinary ability, but unlike previous generations, she would grow up, understanding and celebrating her uniqueness. After the ceremony, while the guests dispersed through the garden, Bernice approached Richard. "Dad," she said softly, "we found something else in your files. Something about Mom." Richard raised, his eyes surprised. "She knew," continued Bernice, "she knew about the special power she carried, about how she could help other people, and she left a diary that you hid all these years." Richard closed his eyes, an ancient pain crossing his face. "Your mother," he said with a hoarse voice, "wanted to create a place exactly like this, a sanctuary where people like her could meet, strengthen each other. I didn't understand at the time. I thought I was protecting our family by keeping everything secret. And you ended up preventing us from realizing her dream," completed Bernice. "Until now." At that moment, Lily approached running, her eyes shining with that innocent wisdom that so impacted everyone. "Grandpa!" she called, taking Richard's hand. "Come see something!" She led him to a small side garden where other children with the same condition were playing. In the center of the garden, a newly installed fountain bubbled gently. At the base of the fountain, a bronze plaque gleamed in the sun. "In memory of all the guardians who came before us, and in celebration of all who will come after." Richard touched the plaque with trembling fingers, recognizing the words. They were the same that his wife had written in her diary so many years ago. Across the garden, Theodore watched the scene with Deborah. "You know," he said, "when I found you on that icy sidewalk, I thought I was just helping a child in need. I never imagined I was being part of something much bigger." Deborah smiled, watching Lily, who was now playing with the other children. "Sometimes we need to get completely lost to find our true path," she replied. "That's what happened to me, with Bernice, with all of us." Jasmine approached, bringing an old folder. "We found more records," she said, "from other families scattered throughout the country, people who don't even know they carry this special gift." "Then we have work to do," replied Deborah with determination. In the center of the garden, Lily had gathered all the children in a circle. Holding hands, they laughed and sang, their voices mixing with the sound of the water from the fountain. To a casual observer, it would be just a common scene of children playing. But to those who knew the truth, it was much more. It was the beginning of a new era, where what was once seen as weakness was revealed as strength, where secrets gave way to the truth, where fear was replaced by hope. And in the midst of it all, a small 6-year-old girl who, unknowingly, had been the catalyst for a transformation that would affect future generations. Lily, who one day trembled with cold on a sidewalk, now radiated warmth and light to all around her. The snow had melted in Chicago, but the change it brought would remain forever. At the Martins Institute, among children's laughter and renewed hope, a new story began to be written. A story of healing, of redemption, and, above all, of love.